The morning sun rose over the hills of Ephraim, casting its first light upon the home of Elkanah, a man of good heart and steady faith. His house, however, was not filled with peace. Two women lived beneath his roof, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah, proud and sharp-eyed, moved about the courtyard surrounded by her children, their laughter echoing through the halls like a taunt to the one woman who had none. Her hair was dark and full, her garments vibrant, her tone often cutting. She took pride not only in her motherhood but in reminding Hannah of what she lacked. And then there was Hannah, quiet, graceful, and heavy with unspoken sorrow. She was in her early 30s, her long brown hair tied neatly under a soft linen veil, her robe a humble shade of cream. She carried her pain with dignity, yet her eyes betrayed years of silent tears. Every year when Elkanah brought his family to Shiloh to worship and offer sacrifices to the Lord, the same cycle repeated: devotion, celebration, and humiliation. Elkanah loved Hannah deeply. When the feast began, he would give portions to Peninnah and her children, but to Hannah he gave a double portion. For he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. But love could not silence the whispers of barrenness, nor could it erase the sting of Peninnah's mocking. Hannah's heart broke quietly, and each tear that fell was a prayer the world could not hear. The courtyard buzzed with celebration as meat was roasted, flutes played, and wine was poured. Children ran about with garlands in their hair, laughter mingling with the scent of incense. But amid the joy sat Hannah, untouched by festivity. Peninnah's laughter pierced through the air. "Ah, Hannah," she said with a smirk, "perhaps next year you'll have a child of your own to bring a gift for the altar." Her words were honeyed with cruelty, and the others chuckled nervously. Elkanah's face fell. He approached Hannah, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Hannah," he said gently, "why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? But Hannah said nothing. She could not answer with words when her heart had none left to give. That night, as the feast ended and silence settled over the camp, she rose quietly. Her steps led her beyond the tents, to the tabernacle of the Lord. The tabernacle stood in the stillness of the night, its lamp burning softly, its air thick with the scent of offerings and prayers. Eli, the high priest, sat by the post of the temple, weary from the day's sacrifices, his old eyes dim yet observant. Hannah entered quietly, her robe brushing against the stone floor. She knelt before the altar, her body trembling, her soul unraveling. Her lips moved, but no sound escaped. Her tears became her language. "O Lord of hosts," she whispered within her heart, "if you will indeed look upon the affliction of your handmaid and remember me, if you will give unto your servant a son, then I will give him unto you all the days of his life." Her shoulders shook. Every word came from a depth beyond pain, from faith that had been broken yet refused to die. Eli watched her. Her lips moved without sound, and her body swayed as though consumed by grief. He frowned and approached her slowly. "How long will you be drunk?" he said sternly. "Put away your wine." Hannah raised her tear-streaked face. "No, my lord," she replied softly. "I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk no wine nor strong drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord." For a moment, silence hung between them. Eli's expression softened. He saw, in her trembling form, the unmistakable presence of faith. He said, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him." Hannah bowed her head. Her tears had not ceased, but something within her shifted. Grief gave way to quiet hope. Outside, the stars glittered like promises yet to be fulfilled. Hannah walked slowly back toward her tent. The night air was cool, her eyes still wet, but her heart strangely calm. She had prayed, and for the first time in years, she believed she had been heard. Peninnah was already asleep, her children curled beside her. Elkanah sat awake, waiting. When Hannah entered, He looked up anxiously, but her expression silenced his concern. He saw in her eyes a peace he had never seen before, not joy yet, but surrender. That night, Hannah lay awake for a long time, her hands clasped across her heart. She whispered into the darkness, "Lord, I will wait." And the heavens listened. Dawn broke over Shiloh with a golden stillness. The family rose early to worship one last time before returning home. Hannah's steps were lighter now. Her tears were gone, replaced with the quiet strength of a woman who had wrestled with heaven and found peace. When she stood before the tabernacle again, she looked toward the same spot where she had wept and whispered, "You heard me." Elkanah watched her closely, sensing a mystery in her silence, something holy. And when they journeyed back to Ramah, the road felt shorter, the air brighter, as though the Lord himself walked beside them. In the months that followed, time passed gently. The seasons changed, rain turned to bloom and bloom to harvest. And then, one morning, Hannah felt the stirring of life within her. Her trembling hands touched her belly, and she wept anew. Not in sorrow, but in awe. The promise had begun. It began in silence, not in thunder. Hannah woke before sunrise. The house was still. No children's footsteps, no mocking laughter, no clatter of dishes or questions of, "Mother, may I?" That kind of noise lived on Peninnah's side of the house. For years, Hannah had lived in that quiet, a quiet that tasted like shame. But this morning was different. She sat upright slowly, one hand resting on her stomach. A strange warmth pulsed there, gentle but undeniable. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "is this?" Her heart began to race, not in fear, but in reverence. She knew, before her body had fully changed, before anyone else could see it, she knew. Not a dream, not a suggestion, a beginning. Life had entered her, and it had not come from man alone. It had come by permission, by mercy, by timing, by decree. Something holy had just touched the earth through her. Hannah pressed her forehead against her knees and began to cry. Not the broken sobs she cried in Shiloh, but the kind of trembling joy that comes when a prisoner hears the lock fall open. She did not call for Elkanah. She did not call for a midwife. She called for God. "You remembered me," she whispered. "You remembered me." The room felt different. The air felt alive. For the first time in years, Hannah did not feel invisible. She felt seen, chosen, trusted. And with that knowing came something deeper than happiness, responsibility. Because Hannah remembered her own words. "If you give me a son, I will give him back." Her lips trembled. "I said it," she whispered to herself. "I vowed it. I cannot pretend I did not." This child, this miracle, would not belong to her. He would pass through her, but he would not stay. And even as joy washed over her, she felt the first stab of what it would cost. A child birthed in answered prayer, promised away before his first cry. The vow had been made in desperation. Now it was alive in her body. Now it was real, and real vows cost. Later that morning, Elkanah entered, carrying grain from the storehouse. He was a kind man, not cruel, not distant, not careless. He had always tried to comfort Hannah in the only way he knew, with words, offerings, and a too soft smile. He set the basket aside and looked at her. "Hannah," he said quietly, "you look different." She turned to him. There was a light in her face he had not seen in years. The strain in her eyes seemed to have melted. She almost looked like the girl he married, before sorrow settled in her bones. "Elkanah," she said softly, "the Lord has done it." For a long moment he just stared at her, not daring to speak. Then his breath escaped in a half-laugh, half-sob. "Hannah," he whispered, voice shaking. "Hannah." He moved toward her and held her face in his hands, searching it as if to confirm what his heart was afraid to believe. "Are you certain?" Tears gathered in her lashes. I am. He wrapped his arms around her and held her for a long time. His shoulders trembled. He had loved her through years of emptiness, and in that embrace there was both relief and worship. But Hannah's face, pressed against his chest, was not only joyful, it was also resolved. When she finally pulled back, she said quietly, "Elkanah, listen to me." That tone, gentle but firm, made him straighten. "If this is a son," she whispered, "he will belong to the Lord." Elkanah blinked. "Of course," he said softly. "Every child belongs to the Lord." "No," Hannah said. "Not like that." Her voice lowered. "I made a vow in Shiloh. I asked for a son. I vowed that if God would open my womb, I would return the child to him. I said he would serve the Lord all his life. I said he would not be mine. I said I would give him back." Silence. Elkanah stared at her. "Hannah, you said that before you conceived?" "Yes." "In your grief?" "Yes." "Hannah, people say desperate things in sorrow." "I was not speaking to people," she answered. Her calm frightened him. He swallowed. "And if it is a son, you would give him away?" "Your firstborn." Her firstborn. The word hit the air like a hammer. Hannah closed her eyes. The pain of it shook through her, but her answer did not change. "Yes," she whispered. "Even my firstborn. Especially my firstborn." Elkanah looked at her for a long time. Finally he exhaled. "Do what seems good to you," he said quietly. "May the Lord establish his word." He did not fully understand. He did not fully agree. But he would not stand against her vow. He loved her too much to fight what God had done in her. Time began to move with purpose. Hannah did not rush to announce it. She did not run to Peninnah and boast, "The Lord has opened my womb." She did not stand in the courtyard to make speeches. She carried it in silence. For months, she walked with her hand over the child within her, whispering blessings. Not possessive ones, "You are mine," but offerings, "You are his." She spoke to him the way mothers speak to sons who are destined before birth. "My child," she whispered, sitting near the doorway in the pale afternoon light. "You were not given for my comfort. You were given for Israel." She smiled softly. "Do you hear me? You will serve him. You will hear his voice. You will not chase power. You will not belong to corruption." Her eyes darkened for a moment, because even in those days the priesthood in Shiloh was not clean. Eli, the high priest, was aging. His sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were known for greed and dishonor. They handled holy things with unholy hands. People whispered about them at wells and in fields. You could feel the tension in Israel, faith under priests who did not fear God. Hannah felt that tension like a wound. "My son," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do not become like them." Sometimes, in the quiet of night, fear tried to creep in. What if I give him, and he's swallowed by a corrupt house? What if I release him to men who don't respect holiness? What if I keep him for his own safety? Her hand went to her stomach again. "Lord, I trust you more than I trust myself." That surrender, that repeated surrender, became the rhythm of her pregnancy. Every mother builds a room for her child. Hannah built an altar. When the appointed time came, the house stirred in urgency. Midwives moved quickly. Lamps were lit. Fabric was boiled and wrung. Water steamed in clay vessels. Peninnah lingered in the corner doorway, watching with unreadable eyes. Curiosity, jealousy, maybe even fear. Hannah cried out, but her cry was not like other women's. Beneath the pain there was worship. "Lord," she gasped between contractions. You remembered me." The midwife leaned over her. "Breathe, Hannah. Again, again. Stay with me. One more." Hours felt like lifetimes. Then, in a single holy moment, the room filled with the sound Hannah had waited years to hear. A newborn's cry, It shattered the air. It shattered the silence that had lived in her chest for so long that it had almost become part of her identity. The midwife laughed, breathless, weeping. "It is a son," she whispered. "A son." They placed him in Hannah's arms. He was small, warm, alive. His tiny mouth trembled as he cried. His hands opened and closed like little prayers. Hannah stared at him, and everything inside her melted. All the mockery, all the years of emptiness, all the "what's wrong with you?" all the "maybe God is punishing you," gone. Gone in a moment. Her tears fell onto his forehead. She kissed him, then pressed her face against his and whispered, "I know who you are. Elkanah," she called weakly. He rushed to her side. When he saw the child, his knees almost failed him. He covered his mouth and sobbed, turning away for a moment as if the sight was too holy to look at directly. "How will you call him?" the midwife asked. Hannah did not hesitate. "Samuel," she whispered. "Why Samuel?" Because in their tongue, his name carried a meaning: heard by God, asked of God. God has listened. Every time his name would be spoken in the years to come, in her house, in the temple, in Israel, in prophecy and in judgment and in coronation, that truth would echo. God hears. God answers. God moves. Days passed. Then weeks. Samuel grew stronger. His cries became the music of the house. Even Peninnah, who once spoke with knives, now walked with caution. The air around Hannah had changed. Hannah nursed him, held him, sang to him. She inhaled the sweetness of his hair. She felt the tiny rise and fall of his breathing against her chest at night. And every hour that passed made the future harder to face, because Hannah knew he was not staying. When the time came for the yearly sacrifice at Shiloh, Elkanah began preparing to travel. "Come," he said gently. "Let us go up and worship as we always have." "Not yet," she said softly. She held Samuel closer. "I will not go up until the child is weaned. Then I will bring him, and he will appear before the Lord, and he will stay there, forever, forever." The word nearly broke her. Elkanah looked at her for a long time. "Do what seems best to you," he said quietly. "Only, may the Lord cause his word to stand." She nodded. Samuel shifted in her arms, tiny and warm and completely unaware of destiny. Hannah rocked him slowly. "Listen to me, my son," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I will give you. I will not hold you back. I will not break my vow. I will not lie to God. I will not say later. I will not say just a little longer." Her tears slipped down her face and landed on his blanket. "I will love you," she whispered, "by letting you go." Outside, the house breathed like any other home in Israel. Inside, a mother and God were in covenant, and heaven was watching. The sound of a child's laughter filled the courtyard of Elkanah's house. Soft, musical, and full of wonder. Samuel was no longer a newborn. His tiny fingers had learned to grasp, his eyes to seek light, and his smile could melt the hardest heart. Hannah sat beneath the fig tree holding him close. Her robe, a deep cream linen edged with blue thread, caught the breeze as she rocked him. The scent of figs and olive leaves filled the air. Elkanah approached quietly, carrying a carved wooden toy. "You're growing fast," he murmured to his son. "Soon you'll be running before I can catch you." Hannah smiled faintly, but there was something behind her eyes, something distant. Every laugh, every soft breath, every heartbeat from Samuel reminded her of both joy and loss. Each day brought her closer to the moment she dreaded, the day she must give him back. Her hand brushed through his fine brown curls, and she whispered, "You were born of tears, my child, but you shall live by purpose." Samuel's little hand reached for her face. She caught it and pressed it to her lips. The vow had not changed. The pain of it had not softened. But Hannah's heart had grown, not weaker from fear, but stronger from love that obeys. Years passed like fleeting shadows. Samuel had learned to walk, to speak, to lift his small hands when he prayed beside his mother at dusk. His voice was soft but sure. His laughter carried through the courtyard like a song. When he turned about 3 years old, the age when children were weaned and ready to live without a mother's breast, Hannah knew what the time meant. The vow had ripened. One morning, as the dew still clung to the vines, Elkanah entered and saw her preparing linen garments and a small woven satchel. He knew what she was doing. "Is it time?" he asked softly. She nodded. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were wet. "I promised the Lord," she said, "and the time has come." They began to prepare for the journey to Shiloh, the same road they had walked many times before, but this time the air felt heavier. Peninnah said nothing. For once, the woman who had mocked Hannah for years could not find words. There was something sacred in what was happening, a kind of holiness that silenced cruelty. As they packed, Hannah folded a small linen tunic for Samuel, stitched with care. Each thread was a prayer. "Let his robe never touch corruption," she whispered as she folded it. When all was ready, she lifted Samuel into her arms. Her voice trembled. "Come, my son. We go to the house of the Lord." The road wound through olive groves and across rocky hills. Elkanah led the donkey, and Hannah walked beside it, holding Samuel's hand. The boy's eyes were wide with curiosity. Every bird, every stream, every patch of wildflowers seemed to fascinate him. "Mother," he asked, "where are we going?" Hannah looked down at him and smiled faintly. "To see the Lord's house, my son, the place where I prayed for you." He nodded thoughtfully, though he did not understand. His small feet stumbled, and Elkanah lifted him onto the donkey's back. Hannah walked beside him, never taking her eyes from him. As the sun climbed higher, the heat shimmered across the hills. But Hannah felt no weariness. Her heart was burning too brightly with purpose and pain. With each step, she whispered within herself, "Lord, this is yours. I am yours. He is yours." By the time the golden roofs of Shiloh appeared in the distance, her legs trembled. But she kept walking, because her promise demanded it. Because love, real love, sometimes walks you toward surrender. The courtyard of the tabernacle was alive with worship. Families came and went with sacrifices. Priests moved about in linen garments. The sound of trumpets echoed against the stone walls. Eli, now older, sat once again by the post of the temple. His eyes dim but his memory sharp. He saw them approach: Elkanah, Hannah, and a small boy holding his mother's hand. Hannah's steps slowed as she entered the courtyard. For a moment, she stood in the same place where she had once knelt, weeping in silence, her lips moving with a vow only heaven heard. Now she stood in fulfillment of that vow. She approached Eli and bowed low. "My Lord," she said softly, "do you remember me? I am the woman who stood here beside you, praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord has granted me my petition." Eli blinked, squinting at her. Recognition spread slowly across his face. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I remember. The woman who prayed without voice. The one I thought was drunk." A faint smile touched his lips. "And this is the child?" Hannah nodded. Her voice broke slightly as she said, "For this child I prayed, and the Lord has given me what I asked of him. Therefore, I have also given him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall belong to him." The words trembled in the air like a song too sacred to touch. Eli placed a trembling hand on the boy's head and whispered, "The Lord bless you, my son. May his word never depart from your heart." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as she knelt beside Samuel. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "Serve him, my child. Even when I am not there to remind you, serve him." Samuel looked at her, confused. He did not understand what was happening. He only knew his mother's eyes were full of love and sorrow. "Will you stay with me, mother?" he asked innocently. Hannah bit her lip. I will see you again, she said softly. But you belong to the Lord now. Her fingers lingered on his cheek one last time. A mother's final touch before the ache of separation. The sun dipped behind the hills of Shiloh, casting long shadows over the temple courts. Hannah stood at a distance now, watching Eli take Samuel's small hand and lead him toward the inner court where the priests served. Samuel looked back, once, twice, his small frame illuminated by the golden light spilling from the sanctuary. Hannah's heart cracked, but she did not run after him. She stood still. Tears streamed silently down her face, and she whispered, "He was yours before he was mine." Elkanah placed a steady hand on her shoulder, but even he dared not speak. The silence between them was holy. When the gates closed behind the boy, the sound of the latch echoed like the closing of a chapter. Yet even in that pain, peace was born. As they turned to leave Shiloh, Hannah looked up at the evening sky. Her tears glistened in the dying light, but her lips formed a faint smile, because she knew her womb had not just borne a son. It had borne a servant, prophet, a voice that would one day anoint kings and restore righteousness to a nation. As the night wind moved through the olive trees, she whispered, "My heart is not empty, Lord. It is planted." And somewhere beyond the temple walls, Samuel slept beneath the same roof as the ark, the first sound of his breathing mingling with the presence of God. The house in Ramah was quiet again, not the bitter silence of barrenness, but a new kind of emptiness. The sound of Samuel's laughter no longer echoed through the courtyard. The small wooden toys lay untouched. His sleeping mat was carefully folded in the corner, just as Hannah had left it before their journey to Shiloh. Every dawn, Hannah found herself turning instinctively toward his room. For a heartbeat she would forget, then remember, and her breath would tremble as she whispered, "He's not here, but he's where he belongs." Elkanah watched her from the doorway, his heart caught between admiration and sorrow. She did not weep like before. Her grief had changed shape, no longer a cry of loss, but a silent offering. She moved about the house with gentle discipline, sweeping, baking, praying, each motion filled with purpose. Every day, she whispered Samuel's name in prayer, not as a plea, but as a blessing. When Peninnah passed by, she sometimes stared at Hannah with strange eyes, half pity, half awe. The woman she had mocked for years now carried a dignity that Peninnah could not understand. It was as if giving Samuel had unlocked something sacred inside her. The one who had been called barren now bore the fruit of faith. A year passed, then another. When the time for the yearly sacrifice came again, Elkanah prepared his animals for the offering. Hannah joined him, not with reluctance, but with renewed strength. In her hands, she carried a small linen robe, carefully woven, its edges stitched with blue thread, made to fit a boy just a little taller than she last remembered. She smiled faintly as she held it close. "It will keep him warm through the cold nights," she murmured. Elkanah watched her quietly. "You make it every year," he said, "and every year you weep a little less." Hannah turned to him. "That's because I no longer see it as loss," she said softly. "It's worship." They journeyed once more toward Shiloh, the same winding road of dust and olive trees. But this time, Hannah's pace was steady, her steps calm. She carried no anguish, only expectation. As they neared the tabernacle, her heart raced. Would Samuel remember her? Would he run to her arms, or stand shyly, unsure of the woman who gave him away? She did not know, but she knew the Lord had kept him, and that was enough. The tabernacle stood in sacred stillness, bathed in morning light. The curtains rippled softly in the breeze. The smell of burnt offerings lingered in the air. Eli sat in the court, his face more aged now, his beard streaked with white. Beside him, a young boy in linen garments moved with quiet grace, fetching scrolls, trimming lamps, sweeping dust from the altar floor. "Samuel," His hands were small, but his movements were careful, reverent. His eyes were bright, his spirit peaceful. When Hannah saw him, her breath caught in her throat. "My son," she whispered, voice trembling. Samuel turned, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He hesitated, then smiled shyly. "Mother!" The sound of that word broke her heart open. She knelt and opened her arms, and he ran to her, the years between them melting away in a single embrace. Hannah held him tightly, her tears falling into his hair. She wanted to hold him forever, but she also knew she could not. She pulled back, smiling through her tears. "I brought something for you," she said, unfolding the small robe. "I made it just your size." Samuel laughed softly as she placed it over him. "It's warm," he said, touching the soft linen. "Thank you, Mother." Eli watched the scene quietly. He had seen many mothers bring offerings to the tabernacle, but none like this one. He saw in Hannah not merely affection, but devotion of the highest kind, the worship that costs everything. As Hannah rose, Eli blessed her once more. "May the Lord give you more children," he said kindly, "for the one you have given to his service." Hannah bowed deeply. "Let it be so," she said. "The Lord has kept his word. I will keep mine." The following years unfolded like gentle waves. Each year, Hannah and Elkanah returned to Shiloh, bringing sacrifices, and each time Hannah brought a new robe for Samuel. Each visit revealed how much he had grown. Taller, wiser, his voice clearer, his prayers stronger. And each year Hannah's own home grew louder, for the Lord remembered her again. He blessed her womb with 3 sons and 2 daughters. The woman once mocked as barren now filled her home with laughter and song. But her heart never grew distant from Samuel. Every time she nursed a new child, she whispered, "You live because I gave." Every time she heard Samuel's name in a traveler's story, she smiled and said, "He lives because I obeyed." One evening, while the lamps flickered low, she began to hum a melody, a song born from memory, faith, and fulfillment. Her voice rose softly, like a prayer carried on the wind. "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is lifted high in the Lord. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird themselves with strength. Those who were full have hired themselves for bread, but the hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, and she who has many children has grown faint." Her voice trembled through the last verse. It was not a song of pride, it was a song of reversal. The cry of a woman who had seen God turn shame into purpose, and silence into prophecy. Elkanah listened from the doorway, tears in his eyes. He had loved her in her emptiness, and now he loved her in her fullness. Hannah had become more than a mother. She had become a message. Years later, when Hannah's hair had begun to show strands of silver, word reached Ramah of a young prophet in Shiloh, a boy who heard the voice of God while others slept. Samuel, the same child who once nursed at her breast, now walking in the courts of kings and priests, bearing the word of the Almighty. When she heard it, Hannah closed her eyes, and her heart swelled with reverent joy. That night, she went outside and looked toward the direction of Shiloh. The stars were bright, the same stars she once prayed under in her barrenness, the same stars that had watched her tears fall at the altar years ago. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trusting me with him. You took what I gave, and you multiplied it beyond measure." The wind stirred through the olive branches, as though heaven itself answered her gratitude. She smiled faintly, hands clasped before her chest, and in that moment, she realized something profound. She had asked for a son, but God had given her a story that would outlive generations. A story not of gain, but of surrender. A story that proved the greatest offerings are not made on altars of stone, but in the quiet hearts of mothers who let go. The moon rose high over Ramah, spilling silver light across Hannah's courtyard. The vines swayed softly in the evening wind. The sounds of her younger children playing faded as she sat alone by the window, a woven shawl draped around her shoulders. Before her, on the small wooden table, lay an oil lamp, its flame flickering, steady and golden. It was the same kind of lamp that burned in the tabernacle of Shiloh, the same light her son, Samuel, tended each night as a servant of God. Hannah's gaze softened. How many nights had she sat like this, waiting for dawn, remembering him? How many prayers had she whispered in the quiet, not of longing anymore, but of gratitude? She had lived long enough to see the fruit of her obedience ripen in the land. Her son had become known throughout Israel, a boy who heard God's voice when the priest could not, a youth whose words did not fall to the ground. And as she sat in the silence of her home, a realization dawned within her heart. Her story was no longer just about motherhood. It had become about God himself, about what he does with those who yield. The woman who once wept in a temple now sat as a matriarch of faith. And in the stillness, she began to whisper again, not in sorrow, but in triumph. It was the time of annual worship again. Elkanah and the family prepared to journey to Shiloh, and though the years had added lines to Hannah's face and silver to her hair, her steps remained firm. She carried with her a new robe, larger, broader across the shoulders, fit for a young man now. Each stitch was a mother's prayer woven into fabric. Each thread a reminder that faith must be refreshed year after year. When they reached the tabernacle, Samuel stood before them, no longer a child, but a youth dressed in priestly linen, tall and composed. His face bore the calm strength of one who had been in the presence of God. "Mother," he said with a smile, bowing slightly in respect. His voice had deepened, yet it still carried the gentleness she remembered from his boyhood. Hannah reached up, touching his cheek as tears filled her eyes. "You've grown, my son," she whispered. "The Lord has truly kept you." Samuel took her hands and said softly, "Your prayers built my strength, mother. Every robe you made, I wore your faith." Eli, now frail, leaned on his staff beside them, watching silently. He saw in their meeting the living faith that he himself had long prayed Israel would recover. As they spoke, other priests and people nearby turned their gaze toward Samuel, the young servant who heard the Lord's voice when others could not. They spoke of him with reverence, and of his mother with awe. The woman who once entered this place in tears now returned as a living psalm. That evening, when the offerings were complete, Hannah stood once more before the altar, the same place where she once knelt, lips moving silently in despair. Now her lips moved in power. The courtyard fell quiet as she began to speak, her voice not trembling this time, but strong and alive. It was not a prayer of need. It was a song of victory. Her words rose like the morning sun over Israel. "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth boasts over my enemies, for I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. There is none besides you. There is no rock like our God." The people listened in silence. Hannah's eyes glowed with a light that was not her own. The Spirit of God stirred in her, and her song became prophecy, reaching beyond her lifetime, beyond her son, into the ages to come. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. He raises the poor from the dust, and lifts the beggar from the ash heap, to set them among princes, and make them inherit the throne of glory. As she spoke, it was as though heaven itself echoed her words. The same God who turned her shame into strength would one day do the same for his people. Eli's frail hands trembled. He could feel it. This was no ordinary prayer. It was a prophetic declaration, the spirit of divine reversal. It foretold the rise of kings and the fall of the proud. And deep within the courts of heaven, God smiled upon his handmaid, because her voice, once broken by sorrow, now carried the sound of victory. That night, after the song faded into silence, Hannah and Elkanah began their journey home. The air was cool, the stars bright above them. The path felt lighter than ever before. Hannah walked slowly, her fingers brushing the folds of her robe. She no longer carried pain, only peace. Her life had come full circle. From barrenness to birth, from pleading to praise. In the distance, the lights of Shiloh flickered like memories, reminders of where it all began. She turned back once more, whispering, "I came here broken. I leave whole." In the years that followed, the story of Hannah and Samuel spread through Israel. Mothers whispered it to their daughters. Priests spoke of it during offerings. And as Samuel grew to become the prophet who anointed kings, people remembered the woman who first anointed him, not with oil but with tears. When Samuel would later anoint Saul, and then David, he would carry her vow in his spirit, the same vow that birthed him. Every drop of oil that touched a king's forehead carried the echo of his mother's prayer. Decades passed. Hannah's hair turned white as snow, and her hands trembled with age. But her eyes, those eyes that once overflowed with tears, still shone with faith. One morning, she sat beneath the same fig tree where she once rocked baby Samuel in her arms. The sunlight fell gently across her face, warm and golden. She whispered softly, "He was yours all along." And in the breeze, it felt as if heaven whispered back, "And so were you." A smile touched her lips. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth rest on her skin. Her breathing slowed, peaceful and steady, like a prayer being answered one last time. When her family found her later, her hands were folded, her expression serene. And in the distance, the sound of children's laughter carried through the air. The sound of legacy, of life, of faith fulfill. From that day onward, Hannah's name became synonymous with surrender that births greatness. Her story was told beside every cradle of Israel, teaching mothers and fathers alike that God sees, God hears, and God remembers. She was no longer just Hannah, the barren woman. She was Hannah, the faithful mother of the prophet, whose tears became songs, and whose silence became scripture. And long after she was gone, her words continued to echo through the ages, a melody of faith sung by every soul who ever cried out to God in the dark and found light again.